From the outside, everything looked like a bunch of events that had been building up for many years, a long and complicated path where Rob Reiner never gave up until it all ended in a total tragedy. The sudden death of Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle Singer Reiner in their mansion in Brentwood, Los Angeles, was first seen as a deeply painful, quiet, and heartbreaking family loss. But the moment federal investigators got involved, that calm picture shattered completely, showing a disturbing web of secrets that was much darker than anyone could have guessed. The mansion, which for decades had been full of warmth, laughter, and family memories, seemed to hide something sinister under its fancy and well-kept look. Under the time-worn wooden floors, the agents found a hidden door that at first seemed like just another part of a normal search. But what was inside left even the most experienced investigators frozen in shock. Classified documents and high-level surveillance devices, supposedly linked to powerful political figures, turned the Reiners' house into something way more than a private home, making it a real storage spot for information that could change how the public saw certain connections. Among the discoveries, there was also Rob's personal diary with emotional words aimed at Nick, where he asked for forgiveness and warned him to be careful. Disturbing lines that made everyone wonder what Rob really knew and what he was trying to protect before everything fell apart. So a big question came up that no one could avoid. What was really hidden behind the walls of that beautiful house? And if this tragedy could be more than just family drama, maybe connected to something planned, to a much bigger story that could shake up both Hollywood and political circles to their core. The Brentwood Mansion, which for years stood for beauty, comfort, and classic old Hollywood charm, suddenly turned into the center of one of Los Angeles's most unsettling mysteries. The Brentwood neighborhood itself, known for its quiet, tree-lined streets, ocean breeze, and home to celebrities, politicians, and millionaires looking for privacy and status, got wrapped in an uneasy feeling that was hard to ignore. Near Sunset Boulevard, surrounded by thick greenery, stood the impressive home of Rob Reiner and Michelle Singer Reiner, a place that wasn't just another luxury property, but a family sanctuary they had lived in for over 3 decades. Hidden behind tall hedges and elegant iron gates, the house gave off elegance and nostalgia like a quiet witness to years of laughter, love, and movie history. Built in the 1930s in a traditional New England style, the property covered about 930 square meters and had 6 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, staff areas, a sparkling pool, shaded gardens, and even a private tennis court. Beyond its money value, the home's spirit was always tied to warmth, a space where family came first and where art, creativity, and togetherness filled every corner. Rob and Michelle didn't just own the mansion, they cared for its legacy, hosting private dinners, deep talks about art and social causes, and quiet meetings with close friends and influential guests, keeping alive the feel of a home that for over 30 years represented the Reiner family bond and the dream of a life built on love and unity. Rob Reiner had said more than once that the house's design was one of his biggest dreams, to create a space full of love, creativity, and peace, a safe spot where his family could feel protected from the outside world. For over 30 years, the Brentwood Mansion stayed as the heart of the Reiner family, a place where every weekend their kids Romy, Jake, and Trey would gather to share meals, stories, and everyday moments that strengthened their connection. Ings often started with the smell of fresh coffee, the sound of overlapping chats, and a constant feeling of closeness that seemed to fill every room. But over time, emotional cracks started to show that were hard to hide, quiet tensions that some noticed in family interactions, and that hinted at a constant effort to keep up an image of harmony that didn't always match reality. In that setting, Nick Reiner's return to the family home marked an unexpected turning point. After finishing a rehab program, Nick moved back in with his parents, a choice that at first seemed like a chance for healing and a fresh start. His coming back brought a fragile sense of hope, as if the family was trying to put itself back together after years of struggle, all ready to welcome him with support and love, never guessing that this attempt to rebuild would end up taking on a deeply tragic meaning. That fragile hope broke suddenly one tragic afternoon when Romy Reiner stopped by the house to visit her parents and came across a scene that would scar her forever. Inside the home that for years had been full of warmth and laughter, Romy found Rob and Michelle still and lifeless, a sight that left her totally frozen. The people who had built that space with love and care were now gone. In a moment that seemed to stop the world around her, Shaking and in panic, Romy called 911 and waited with her heart pounding, unable to process what she was seeing. When emergency teams arrived, they found Rob and Michelle with no response, and the house, which had been a family safe haven, quickly turned into a scene of silence and pain. Early investigations confirmed the injuries were serious and pointed to a sudden violent fight that was hard to imagine in its intensity. Rob was found near the living room, while Michelle was found in the kitchen next to what looked like the same knife she had used to prepare family meals. Both were taken to the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office, where experts ruled the cause of death as severe internal trauma, while the mood in Brentwood grew heavier and full of unanswered questions. As the investigation went on, the feeling around the Brentwood mansion got more and more oppressive, like the house itself carried an invisible weight. What was once a family sanctuary started to feel creepy, where every sound seemed louder and every corner held something unspoken. In that heavy atmosphere, words from Rob echoed with crushing force, private thoughts about a father's duty, and the pain of feeling he had failed in his most important job, protecting his son. Those phrases, written long ago, took on a chilling meaning when read with the 2025 date in mind, because while Nick had survived his own battles, Rob was the one who wasn't there anymore. The shock grew when just hours later, there was an unexpected twist that stunned everyone. Nick Reiner was arrested while supposedly trying to leave the area, and those who saw him described a man who seemed distant, caught between regret and fear of what was coming. Many thought his arrest would end the mystery, but the truth was different, since that same night federal agents surprisingly joined the case, showing it was no longer just a local investigation. The question became unavoidable. Why was the FBI suddenly interested in a family tragedy, and what could be in that mansion that needed such a big federal response, opening the door to a much more complicated story than anyone expected? The FBI's arrival made the uneasy feeling in Brentwood stronger, a neighborhood used to quiet and privacy, but suddenly filled with official vehicles and agents moving with unusual seriousness. For the federal investigators, Rob Reiner wasn't just a Hollywood legend, but a man with deep ties to social causes and links to influential political people, raising fears that his home might hold sensitive communications or materials needing federal protection. As night fell on the 16th, the streets that usually felt peaceful seemed covered in a quiet threat, and the agent's presence confirmed the tragedy was far from ordinary. That's when Nathaniel Cross came in, an agent known for his sharp instinct and careful way of uncovering the truth. From the moment he passed through the mansion gates, he knew it wasn't a simple family drama, but something deeper, something tied directly to power and politics. As he walked through each room, his steps echoed on the wooden floors, and his eyes scanned the art, furniture, and smallest details, as if the house itself was whispering secrets. While agents secured the area and set up surveillance equipment, turning that warm home into a frozen crime scene where the truth waited to come out. Inside the mansion, the silence became almost unbearable, and the spaces that once held family breakfasts and private talks now felt heavy with tension in every shadow. Nathaniel Cross spoke quietly to Sergeant Ramirez, giving clear instructions to collect every record available, from activity reports to details on Nick's recent moves, leaving nothing out. Everyone there felt it had stopped being just a personal tragedy and was growing into something much bigger. Outside, neighbors watched carefully from behind fences and curtains, shocked to see their quiet streets full of agents and unmarked vehicles, while the hum of recording devices mixed with hushed whispers. It was in that setting when a young LAPD officer, Daniel Hayes, with just 2 years on the job, started to feel like something didn't quite fit. While walking a dimly lit hallway near the library, a small glint caught his eye, a tiny reflection on a wood panel that seemed out of place. With a firm but tense voice, he called Cross over, who came and checked the surface before nodding quietly. Together they pushed the panel, revealing a basement door so well hidden it almost blended with the wall. And what they found beyond was about to leave him speechless. The air turned thick and cold as they went down into that secret basement room, a space clearly meant to stay hidden. Flashlights cut through the dark and revealed rows of locked metal filing cabinets full of neatly organized documents, recordings, and coded materials. When opening the first cabinet, Daniel froze because the files were marked classified and had direct references to powerful political names, along with official seals and internal memos. It was the kind of info that could shake whole institutions if it ever got out. As Daniel carefully flipped through pages, he muttered that this could cause chaos, and Ramirez, crouched beside him, nodded with a hardened look that these weren't just forgotten papers. But the biggest shock came when they reached the far end of the room, where an old wooden desk sat next to a world map, a typewriter, and piles of handwritten notes, as if that place had been Rob's personal workspace where he spent countless hours researching, studying, or maybe trying to protect something. Boxes with encrypted discs, audio recordings, and strange photos marked with mysterious symbols made it feel like a carefully built secret archive. And Daniel couldn't help thinking this went way beyond a movie director, showing a man guarding secrets no one was meant to know. In a dimly lit corner of the basement, something else caught Daniel's eye. A worn, leather-bound notebook resting next to an old pen, as if left there on purpose. When picking it up carefully, he smelled the aged paper and faded ink, and right away knew it wasn't more official records or political documents. It was Rob's personal diary, a private item full of thoughts, confessions, fears, and messages he never shared with his kids. Every page carried heavy emotion, a mix of deep love and quiet desperation that made Daniel feel like he was touching the soul of a man who had carried too many secrets for too long. The first lines were for Nick and weren't just words but a painful and loving confession. And where Rob talked about his worry seeing his son fight alcohol and addiction and his constant effort to keep the family from falling apart. As he read on, Daniel found stories of sleepless nights with a father sitting outside his son's room, waiting and praying for him to find his way back. Lines written in slightly shaky handwriting that still showed unbreakable warmth and a love that refused to break, even when everything else seemed to be crumbling. As Daniel turned the pages, he could clearly feel a father's pain, watching his son battle demons he couldn't fight for him. And each entry showed a vulnerability that clashed with Rob's public image as a successful filmmaker and respected figure. There were unsent letters, life lessons never said out loud, and deep thoughts on work, dreams, and regrets that had followed him for years. Rob's words swung between hope and pain, insisting that despite Nick's mistakes and falls, his love would stay whole and steady. Daniel felt a lump in his throat reading those human, real lines, so different from any report or file he'd ever seen in his job. But on the last page, he found a revelation so personal, it left him frozen, written in unsure but honest handwriting, where Rob admitted Nick wasn't his biological son, though he loved him as his own, and promised no one would ever care for him more. In the same way, the silence in the room seemed total, as if the whole house had stopped. And Daniel realized the biggest secret in that mansion wasn't about power or influence, but about love, loss, and the hidden weight of family pain that Rob had carried to the end. With hands still shaking, Daniel closed the notebook and stayed still, overwhelmed by the deep emotions he'd just read, knowing those pages would forever change how the Reiner family was understood. What started as an investigation full of mystery and tragedy turned into discovering a father's devotion that went beyond blood, a quiet loyalty Rob had protected even at the cost of his own peace. With great care, Daniel put the diary in an evidence bag. Sure, it wasn't just a key item in the case, but the most personal reflection of who Rob really was. Nathaniel Cross, seeing him, right away understood the importance of that find and nodded seriously, knowing that personal testimony carried a different weight than any classified document. But even with the emotional weight of the moment, the investigation was far from over, because the secret basement discovery raised the case to a rarely seen level of seriousness in Hollywood, forcing federal agents to focus on the hidden materials and wonder if Rob and Michelle had been pressured, threatened, or manipulated before dying because of what they kept. While an unsettling suspicion started to form around a security system that never activated, as if whoever entered knew the house better than anyone and wasn't just after the family but the secrets buried in those walls. As forensic tests moved forward, investigators started spotting details that made the story even more disturbing, because in the food and water Rob and Michelle had consumed, traces of rare chemicals were found, so subtle that only advanced lab equipment could detect them. That evidence suggested both had been quietly poisoned before the final attack, a carefully planned way to weaken them and prevent any defense or call for help, making it look like a family tragedy. As if that wasn't enough, agents found hidden listening devices outside the mansion, disguised among trees, flower beds, and garden lights, showing someone had been watching and recording the family for weeks, maybe even months. That discovery made it clear nothing was random, and the operation was part of a detailed plan whose goal wasn't just the family, but the perm. And in silence of a man who knew too much and had dangerous connections. Among the diary pages, one phrase stopped everyone cold. A genuine fearful warning where he admitted there were people ready to end his life if he revealed the full truth. Words that now sounded less like paranoia and more like a confession from someone aware of the threat over him, while each new piece of evidence strengthened the feeling that the Brentwood tragedy could be the end result of invisible pressure from the shadows. With every new find, the web of political ties and hidden surveillance turned the Reiner investigation into one of the most sensitive cases federal agents had handled, because recovered emails and files showed Rob had faced intense pressure to hand over or destroy sensitive material. The messages revealed meetings with highly influential people making demands that could cause real fear, leading investigators to suspect those meetings weren't random, but directly linked to the tragedy that took Rob and Michelle's lives. As Nathaniel Cross's team examined each document line by line, a disturbing theory started to form. Powerful forces might have been working behind the scenes to silence Rob or take the information he'd collected. Given his reputation and reach, agents couldn't rule out he had become a high-risk target. So they started a full mapping of access, motives, and abilities, sending phones, computers, and encrypted drives from the basement for advanced digital recovery. While one central question dominated talks. If someone else knew about that hidden room before the tragedy, because that person could be key to proving it wasn't a family conflict, but a precisely planned operation. As the investigation grew, another name started dominating headlines and public talks with unstoppable force: Nick Reiner, who in just 48 hours became the main suspect. Media attention exploded right away, and every detail of his life was scrutinized, from his past marked by addiction to his semi-autobiographical movie Being Charlie, where he portrayed his own inner struggles. Pictures of Nick handcuffed, escorted at night through South Los Angeles, spread fast, and put him at the center of one of Hollywood's most explosive scandals, leaving public opinion split between those who saw him as a troubled soul caught in something bigger and those who pointed to him as directly responsible for a devastating tragedy. But the speed of his arrest raised deep doubts, as many wondered if it really was him, or if he was being used as a convenient piece to close the case quickly. Some rumors said Nick already knew the truth about his adoption, and that emotional burden could have left deep scars, while other versions claimed in the days before he had seemed calm, committed to recovery, and set on rebuilding his life, forcing investigators to rethink if they had an obvious guilty party, or someone pushed into a role that maybe wasn't his. The conflicting stories only deepened the confusion, as some witnesses claimed the night before the tragedy, Nick had been at a Christmas party at Conan O'Brien's house, and there was a tense exchange with his father, while others close to him insisted he was calm, thoughtful, and focused on his recovery process. Talk of a scolding for bad behavior, harsh words that left a heavy mood, but also accounts of Nick attending therapy regularly, keeping his faith, and showing real progress after rehab. Reports from his treatment center backed that improvement story, making it hard for many to believe he suddenly snapped into extreme violence. That split image forced the FBI to review every detail again, questioning if Nick could have acted alone or if he had been influenced or manipulated by outside forces that used his weakness. Meanwhile, it stood out that the mansion's security system never turned on during theirs attack, an oversight too big to ignore that fed suspicion. The official story might be hiding something much more complex than admitted. As questions piled up, many started wondering if Nick's public past of addiction and personal stumbles had been used against him to build a simple narrative and close the case fast, avoiding focus on his father's political connections and sensitive materials supposedly guarded. Nick's life had been full of struggles from a young age, with years of relapses, unstable periods, and a constant fight for redemption, and his movie Being Charlie, written with Rob, had been a way to face those demons through art. Despite it all, Rob and Michelle never turned their back on him, supporting him even in the darkest times, though the emotional wounds Nick carried stayed deep. Neighbors in the area mentioned hearing screams, slams, and chaotic sounds inside the mansion the night of the tragedy. but none could say for sure what really happened. This lack of clarity opened the door to an even more disturbing idea, the chance that Nick had been influenced or pushed by others, making him the perfect person to take the blame while the real culprits faded into the shadows, leaving a story wrapped in power, secrets, and carefully built silences. As days passed, the Brentwood tragedy stopped being seen just as a Hollywood scandal and started looking like an unsettling reflection of how power, wealth, and secrets can mix in ways that rarely see light. Questions kept growing without clear answers. Who really wanted Rob's classified materials to vanish? Who had the reason and resources to wipe out not just his influence but his whole family? And how much of what was hidden in that basement still had the power to change everything believed? Behind the glamour and fame came a darker truth, a world of manipulations, cover-ups, and quiet pressures that rarely fully come out. While the FBI kept searching the mansion, decoding files, and following every lead, the case stayed open, hanging between a devastating family tragedy and suspicion of a sophisticated operation far beyond those walls. The final question still hung in the air without a clear answer, forcing everyone to wonder if Nick was really guilty or just another piece trapped in a dangerous game he never fully understood. Even now, as federal authorities keep checking every corner of the mansion, decoding documents, analyzing devices, and rebuilding an exact timeline of events, doubts linger and the silence weighs as much as the evidence found. What began as a heartbreaking family loss turned into a puzzle that exposed cracks between private life and invisible power forces, leaving the public caught between opposing versions and incomplete truths. The Brentwood case remains open with more questions than answers, and the feeling that not everything from that night has been revealed. Was it really a home tragedy marked by pain and conflict, or the final move in a carefully designed plan to silence a man who knew too much? As investigators keep working through shadows and secrets, the story of Rob Reiner and his family hangs in an uncertain spot, reminding us that behind perfect Hollywood facades can hide much more complex and disturbing stories than we ever imagine. As time goes on and the case has no final end, the Brentwood Mansion story keeps echoing like a quiet warning about the cost of keeping secrets too big. Every analyzed document, every decoded file, and every reviewed testimony strengthens the feeling this tragedy can't be reduced to a simple explanation. For many, what happened shows the brutal clash between a family life built on love and a web of influences, pressures, and silences that work far from public view. Rob Reiner's figure stays wrapped in an unsettling duality, a celebrated creator and a man who in his last days seemed to carry an invisible weight, threatening everything he loved. Why? While the FBI keeps its work and new pieces appear, the question stays open, waiting for a truth that maybe will never fully come out, leaving the world facing a mystery that still refuses to close. With each passing week, the case keeps sparking debate, theories, and public interest that doesn't fade. Because what happened in that mansion no longer belongs just to one family, but to a bigger story about how fame, power, and information can mix dangerously. For many watchers, the Brentwood tragedy has become a symbol of everything that stays hidden under Hollywood's shiny surface. A reminder that even the fanciest homes can hold uncomfortable truths. While authorities keep working and media wait for new reveals, the story stays open, leaving the audience with the unsettling feeling that maybe the full truth will never be known. The story of Rob Reiner, his family, and the secrets found in those walls lives on, hanging in time, forcing everyone to think about how much appearances can fool and how many stories stay buried without ever seeing light. So, as the echo of this story spreads beyond Brentwood's gates, public attention stays fixed on a case that resists closing and keeps feeding uncomfortable questions. For some, it all points to a family tragedy marked by inner conflicts. For others, the pieces fit better as the end of a much wider web, where information, influences, and silence play key roles. The truth is, every new detail seems to strengthen the idea. It wasn't an isolated event, but an episode exposing shadows that can hide behind fame and prestige. While investigators keep working and the public tries to understand what happened, the story stays open to interpretation, inviting reflection on who was really responsible and if someone else pulled strings from the dark. In the end, the question lingers, and it's up to each person to form their own conclusion about what happened inside that mansion and the price of keeping secrets that maybe never should have existed. Even today, as federal authorities keep the investigation active, and the public stays alert to any possible reveal, the Brentwood Mansion case remains an open wound full of questions. What for many started as a home tragedy ended up turning into a complex tale mixing family pain, hidden secrets, and the shadow of much bigger interests. The story shows that behind Hollywood's polished surface can be layers of reality that rarely show fully. With every new theory and fact that comes out, the mystery deepens instead of closing, forcing those following the case to wonder if the whole truth will ever be known. So Rob Reiner and his family's fate hangs between clashing versions and lasting silences, leaving the viewer with an unsettling thought about how far the results of secrets can go and who really pays the price for hiding them. As time passes, the Brentwood Mansion stopped being just a physical place and became a loaded symbol, a spot where fame, pain, and unanswered questions meet. For many, this case shows the hard time separating truth from guesswork when power and influence get involved, and how a story can turn into something much bigger than known facts. Despite constant efforts by authorities to clear every detail, the empty feeling lingers as if a key puzzle piece is missing. Meanwhile, the public keeps watching, debating, and trying to understand what really happened behind those walls, aware that some truths maybe never come out. The Reiner tragedy stays etched in collective memory as an unsettling reminder that even the most visible lives can hide dark chapters that stay closed forever. In the end, the only thing clear is the feeling this story never gave a true closure. The Brentwood Mansion, once linked to creativity, family, and stability, got marked forever as the scene of a puzzle that defies simply explanations among hidden documents, emotion-filled diaries, and an investigation still wrapped in silence. The Rob Reiner case became an uncomfortable mirror of how truth can break apart when it touches power and fear. For the public, what happened leaves more questions than sure things, and one unavoidable conclusion. Not all stories have a clear end, and some hang in time, forcing us to live with doubt. So, this tragedy's legacy isn't defined just by what was discovered, but also by everything that maybe will never be revealed, staying hidden behind a house's walls that won't be seen the same way again. Yeah,